Hi, I'm Charlene with Disty, and in this segment we will cover the basics of the Replic8 editor. With the editor, we can create 3D interactive training content without writing any code. By recording the actions that we make to our 3D model, Replic8 generates all the necessary files for the training lesson. Let's take a look at the editor. When we launch the Replic8 editor, this is what we see. It has basic windows for various parts of the editor, and we'll go over the purpose of each of these throughout the course of this tutorial. First, let's load our content. Click the File drop-down menu and select Load Equipment. This will bring up a dialog box allowing you to browse for your equipment file. Let's use the same file we saw in the Replic8 previewer. Notice the file extension is .r8e, and this denotes that it is a Replic8 equipment file and that it was exported from 3D Studio Max correctly. Now that we've brought in our file, let's get acquainted with the layout of the editor. Each window can be moved about the interface according to your preferred layout. Simply click and hold the tab and move it to the areas you wish. The areas you can snap it to will be highlighted with a wire frame. These windows can also be viewed as picture-in-picture. They can be hidden along the side, or they can be closed altogether. Let's bring that one back. I'll talk about it in a bit. Now let's begin our tour of the editor. Starting at the top, you'll notice the standard toolbar with common drop-down menus like File and Edit, and these should be intuitive. In this toolbar, there is a drop-down menu for deploying your content, which has several settings for customizing your deployment. And we'll go over each of these in greater detail in a later tutorial. The second toolbar contains most of the icons found in the drop-downs above. Some of these icons are Replic8 specific, and we'll get into more detail with these when we actually create a playback lesson. The green play symbol icon is the Launch and Deploy button. Be sure that all of your deployment settings are correct before you press this button. Also in this toolbar, we have another icon associated with deployment. That's the Build Deployment button. And this gives you two options, one for desktop application and one for web application. This button is a shortcut for producing these applications. When selecting either option, the editor will automatically be configured to build the corresponding deployed application. Now let's move on. Over here we have our equipment window, and this contains all of the parts and behaviors we received from our exported file. Here we can work with parts individually. We can select a specific part and add more interaction to that part, such as a new behavior, or change the default behaviors. We can filter parts by a certain category. We can organize parts in a tree or flat hierarchy. We can also expand and collapse all on the list. Beneath the Equipment tab, we have the Attributes tab. Every part, behavior, and resource in Replic8 has a unique set of attributes, and this is where they are displayed. We have most of the same options for viewing these attributes as above. We can filter them by a certain category. We can sort them alphabetically. We can view an attribute's description. We can expand or collapse all. The Attributes tab primarily allows you to toggle the value of the attribute depending on its characteristic. In the center of the editor, we have the 3D Viewport tab. This displays our 3D content in an open environment. This window allows us to dynamically view our edits as we make them. To the right of the 3D Viewport, we have the Resources tab. This is a managed list of all the editor elements that comprise the lesson development. This is where you would go to create new resources, such as recordings or lessons. And we'll cover these in greater detail in a later tutorial. Below the Resources tab, we have the Environments tab. And this contains all the settings for the open scene environment. We can change the gradient colors of the background. We can change the lighting rig. And we can have a headlight enabled or not enabled. This area also contains more sophisticated controls for the play visual areas of the scene. Right next to the Environments window is the Checklist window. This contains the interactive lesson checklist. Here, you would organize, add, and subtract points along the checklist based on the lesson plan. Next, we have the Documents window beneath the 3D viewport. This tab allows us to make and control recordings. To show you these options, click New Recording. Let's just call it Remove Lampshade. As you can see, making a recording can be very simple. You just click Record, do the action, and then press Stop. And once you've done the action, you can view this action immediately by pressing play. We'll go through a step-by-step process on how to create our actions in a later tutorial. Now before we go any further, let me go over the mouse controls for navigating the 3D scene that I explained in our previous tutorial. A right mouse click and a hold allows us to orbit an object. Holding down on the scroll wheel and moving right and left, up and down, allows us to pan an object. And zooming in and out can be done with the scroll wheel itself. Of course, we still have our magnifying glass for zooming in on a selected part directly. And we still have our reassemble all parts. That's when we take apart parts and we want them to return to their starting position. When you feel confident in your edits to the content, you can deploy by clicking the Deployment button. Although we have not created a lesson, let's deploy this content. It's asking us to save, so let's save it. When I click Deploy, it will bring up the Runtime splash screen, which you can add graphics to the screen to correspond with your training lesson. Since we have not created a lesson, all we have is the exploration mode. And this will run similarly to the previewer that we saw in our previous tutorial. And that's the basics of the Replic8 editor. Join us in our next tutorial as we delve deeper into the editor and we take you through a step-by-step process of creating a playback lesson.